We have called this episode Self-Government and Consent of the Governed.
Okay, this is episode 4 of our series of self-government and consent of the governed, part of our project Common Sense and Common Good. Without saying it, this title about self-government is meant to put democracy front and center in our message, without using the word, but our 2026 Constitutional Delegates, as we reported earlier, identified two primary roots of America's political division and its institutional paralysis. The first one is what we call label epistemology and cultural causes, or those from human nature. Basically, how do people decide what counts as knowledge and truth, or legitimate evidence and morality and real authority, and upon what are these beliefs and opinions based? That's epistemology. The second source of the problem stemmed from what the group called structural defects and omissions. And those are problems within how government and society itself operates, that is, the institutional machinery through which power, influence, incentives, representation, and conflicts are organized and resolved. In a future episode, Franklin will get into that, but as we said here, we're dealing with what goes on in the human brain. Our Committee of 5 has included guests from time to time. We have people come and go and give us their advice, and recently John Adams, America's second president, came in and argued that we needed to identify another goal or objective of this project. He decided he didn't want to appear here. He kind of a little rotund, but a little self-conscious, but he recorded his statement, and we got it here for you to read and to hear in his voice.
Self-government and liberty, indeed Republican government, require citizens with knowledge capable of reason, judgment, and public virtue. Therefore, the education of the people in history, government, human nature, and civic responsibility must stand at the center of your project, common sense, common good. Our citizens must be prepared to resist demagogues and uncompromising factions, and be ready to engage in productive political discourse.
We all agree with Adam's suggestion. I think you probably would too. Therefore, we've changed this episode some and are trying to incorporate into it some of the ideas that we think should be imparted to the public to become a self-governed society, and that we need to improve our curriculum in public schools and other places, and we want to incorporate what we think should be covered in that. This is not meant in any kind of prescriptive way, but it's just trying to present a general overview of what the group thinks should be the nature of such a curriculum and the scope of it. So this episode again is about human nature and epistemology. Obviously, Ken reads, that's the kind of what's behind conversations between people. And these conversations about politics can become disagreements and hostile. Therefore, Adams is suggesting, whether he said it or not, that that to participate in the service of self-government will require more than just people having information and history right. It occurred to some in our group that it demands a level of self-awareness, an open disposition, some communication skills, some self-discipline, and some other important personal and interpersonal traits that we'll try to get into as we go along here. So as we confront this more challenging subject of ourselves and with the common problems we're dealing with ourselves through epistemology and culture, we immediately come upon language as a real issue to deal with. Hannah Arendt, we believe, is the best prepared to discuss that for us in a general way. So, Hannah, I turn the microphone to you.
Thank you, Avery. Societies require human beings to live together in a shared reality that reaches far beyond our material needs. We construct meanings, pass traditions, form loyalty, imagine futures, fear uncertainty, and seek belonging and support. Politics emerges from this condition I call plurality, distinct persons attempting to coexist within a common world while seeing aspects of that world differently. A free society ultimately depends not only upon constitutional structures, but upon the capacity of citizens to govern themselves, to think, to judge, and to restrain both their passions and their certainties. Self-government and consent of the governed require more than elections. They require citizens capable of distinguishing truth from falsehood, reality from propaganda, and disagreement from enmity. Governments arise from human judgments, ambitions, resentments, myths, and moral convictions. Humanity's extraordinary capacity for reason creates such systems, and our equal aptitude for self-deception causes problems in governments. Language amplifies both our abilities for reason and self-deception by several magnitudes. For this reason, we begin with language. Speech enables humans to create shared understanding and goals, and to coordinate action. These can lead to invention and creation or to ruin. Words can be attached to emotions and detached from reason to create slogans, tribal symbols, or instruments for harm. There is no reliable way to measure how much conflict arises just because people attach different meanings to the same words. However, when people first agree on definitions, fair procedures, adopt common grounds of evidence, and accept unbiased mediation, then parties usually can negotiate and reach terms that both accept and neither side will sabotage. I spent decades studying how ideological movements defined words to organize mass loyalty by suppressing independent judgment. Language can create false realities. Deliberation becomes productive when citizens first clarify their meanings, examine evidence honestly, and understand opposing arguments before discussing them. A functioning republic depends not upon complete concord, but upon the continued ability of citizens to share a common reality, to reason through disagreement, to create resolution and cooperation. During the Nuremberg trials of former Nazi executioners, I learned that people do not become dangerous because they are evil, but because ordinary people stop thinking critically about the words and systems they serve. We believe that honest public discourse can prevent that from occurring. That, my friend, ends my statement about language and definitions. Now, as I understand it, Avery, you will address something that comes from your education in social research.
Yes, Hannah, and thank you for your comments. As you said, I was trained in experimental procedure and statistical analysis and psychological theories and stuff, and how to analyze the results of experiments. I've forgotten most of that, especially the statistical part. But some professors pounded into our minds some ideas, an idea particularly that none of us could forget, and that idea was the importance of operational definitions. Hannah explained how definitions define, are at the core of our epistemological and cultural contrast, and especially when it comes to morals and politics and so forth. So constructive political conversations are not possible when people use the same words while assigning completely different meanings to them, or even opposite meanings. And these differences don't require some dictator to come about and change the definitions that some people don't agree with, but because some groups or subgroups, cultures, adopt different values and different sets of meanings to certain words. And I'm going to go through some examples of some here to make my point. Freedom. For some people, freedom means freedom from government interference, and that's a lot of what our Bill of Rights is about. Others, they'll kind of stress the idea of need for poverty and discrimination and exploitation and matters of social justice. And others, like President Adams, say that freedom is to participate meaningfully in society and government. Another hot topic word is equality, which in some circles is equity, but possible meanings of equality include equality before the law, or in our case, under the law. Equality as of dignity and respect, and equality of opportunity, and political influence, or equality of outcomes. That is called the principle of equity. That's that some have drawn attention to. And justice. I worked in criminal justice. This is a big one for me. This one becomes particularly interesting because it blends law, morality, revenge, fairness, and social order. People use justice to refer to retribution or punishment. Social justice can refer to restoration of the victim, and it could be procedural fairness, and to society and authorities, it's a deterrence of crime for the criminal to do it again, and as an example for general deterrence to prevent other people from doing it. And then there's even the values or principles of reformation or rehabilitation of offenders. So when operational definitions we're leading up to here is where you get down to defining how things are practiced, what the actions are, what the outcomes are meant to be, what happens, the machinery that's on the ground or running your institution. So, and in criminal justice, that would, depending on your definition, you could be measuring the kinds of sentences people get, what they do after they're punished and released, and how the victims do in the long run. There's lots of ways to define and understand justice. And again, each one requires a different method of observation and measurement that we need to understand and talk about. So there are lots of ways to define these things, but they'll get into a really personal private kind of example of an operational definition. How would you study love? We all know what love is, but how do we measure it? We can't really measure the feelings objectively, but we can measure how long a couple maintains eye contact and how long or how often they embrace, or how often and long they do other things. Or we could measure heart rate, blood pressure, or tap a blood vessel and measure the levels of a hormone like oxytocin in their blood. And those are all operational definitions. So they're, probably went too far with that example, but there we are. So I believe we've covered definitions and language pretty well here. But we haven't even gotten outside of that subject. There's the whole field of human nature and the epistemology and the culture, and Payne will make that transition for us, and maybe introduce some others that will help us here. All right then, Payne, how large a step is it from operational definitions from nature, culture, and belief?
I say it is like stepping from the slick of a retreating wave into the depths of the ocean. Language is an essential and natural tool of humans, but it is the visible surface of far deeper waters. Beneath language lies memory, fear, identity, loyalty, imagination, and belief itself. We speak what we believe, and that is epistemology. Epistemology concerns nature, origins, limits, and justification of human knowledge. Put plainly, it asks, how do human beings decide what they believe to be true? Here we encounter one of the great complications of human nature. Most people accept or reject new information according to whether it harmonizes with their prior beliefs and identities. When information threatens those foundations, people commonly seek reasons to dismiss it, while embracing evidence that preserves their existing worldview. People do not like changing their opinions or admitting they were wrong. We like consistency and answers to every question. Uncertainty makes us anxious. To help us discuss this problem, I have invited a notable guest. Karl Popper was a philosopher of science born in 1902 who became one of the 20th century's strongest defenders of scientific skepticism, intellectual humility, and what he called the open society. Dr. Popper, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. I am honored to join you and your colleagues. I must first acknowledge a great intellectual influence upon me, David Hume, a Scottish philosopher who died in your revolutionary year of 1776. Hume was among history's greatest skeptics concerning the certainty of human knowledge. He accepted that human beings interpret the world through different varieties of thought, expectations, emotions, and assumptions, and not just objective facts. I came to believe that this tendency, and those Payne just described, affects everyone, including scientists, philosophers, and certainly myself. For this reason, I concluded that we should treat our own ideas as critically as we treat those of our epistemological opponents. An objective and sincere thinker should therefore attempt not to confirm his answers, but to endeavor to discover how they may be wrong. This became central to my philosophy of science. Scientific knowledge does not advance by proving theories are true. It advances through criticism, testing, and attempted falsification. Knowledge advances by disproving theories and creating the need for better ones. A theory that survives repeated efforts to refute it may earn provisional confidence, though never absolute certainty. That was Hume's principle of epistemology. Now try to disprove that. I extended Hume's skepticism into my method of inquiry. I accept that this runs against normal human nature. People are not intellectually humble. We instinctively defend our identities, loyalties, and existing beliefs. That is an essential quirk of human nature. We must understand and we must be certain about it. Apparently, we live in a quantum universe where everything is uncertain, except the idea that if we manage to observe something, then the act of observing it changes its trajectory from its original path. I decided to test an idea. It was an experiment, an intellectual exercise against my own instincts. I pretended to be curious about what my opponent thought and encouraged honest feedback. Honestly, it was somewhat dishonest or disingenuous. However, I discovered that the other fellow often held a valid insight that I had missed. That delivered a measure of intellectual humility. To balance that admission, I award myself much credit for being so fair and open-minded. Genuine discussions require disciplined restraint. Rather than attacking another person's position, we can strive for a traditional virtue of restraint and discipline. Franklin was a serious practitioner of self-awareness, personal accountability, and virtue. Sincere questions and attempting to understand the other person have a paradoxical advantage. If you show an open mind, the other person is prone to reciprocate and give due consideration to your points. This rarely happens in America today, and if and when it ever does happen, no news or media will cover and broadcast it. I believe I said what committee wanted me to say.
Thank you, Dr. Popper. I must say I find your name refreshing, almost like a cold and sparking beverage on ice, except absent from alcohol. And yes, we appreciate your counterintuitive idea of questioning or disproving ideas, rather than adamantly defending them. Thank you. And now we genuinely turn to a broad view of human nature and politics. For that redirection, we return to Dr. Franklin.
Political philosophy in our times, in the Enlightenment, began with assumptions about man and nature, natural man, or what some called the noble savage. In our era, 3 schools of political thought emerged from differing assumptions about human nature. These philosophers were Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Hobbes wrote Leviathan in 1651, arguing that mankind's natural condition was marked by brutality, scarcity, fear, rivalry, and violence. Without strong governing authority, he believed society would descend into disorder and conflict. John Locke altered the principles underlying the American founding. Jefferson drew directly from Locke in the Declaration of Independence regarding equality, natural rights, consent of the governed, and legitimate political authority. Locke argued that human beings possessed reason and natural rights, though governments were necessary to impartially preserve liberty, property, and civil order. Rousseau, in Discourse on the Origin of Inequality and the Social Contract, argued nearly the opposite of Hobbes. He believed human beings in their earlier condition were peaceful and compassionate, but became corrupted by inequality, vanity, property, and artificial hierarchies of larger societies. David Hume approached all such theories skeptically. In his books on human nature and social contract, he rejected that societies arise from contract or rational abstractions. Social self-management evolved slowly through sentiment, experience, utility, coincidence, and social convention. Governments endured because people become accustomed to them and found them sufficiently useful for stability, cooperation, and social order. Though imperfect, they were tolerable.
Dr. Franklin, I am not averse to philosophy, but help me keep things clear. As you know, I am an advocate of common sense. I ask we break this topic into subjects that we can organize and manage in our minds. In this volume of our project, we agreed to focus on practical or functional aspects of our proposals. That is, more about the structural than the philosophical or epistemological. We ask that you identify 7 or so subjects in this realm of our concerns, as the 5 of us have discussed, with input from a few others here in this episode.
Thank you, Payne. I agree that we must keep this discussion accessible to as many people as possible. Not many people enjoy dissecting worm guts for the details. You have reminded me that we have identified 7 domains of human experience, or epistemology, and understanding. They are as follows. We call it the 7 foundations of human understanding and society. 1. Reality and meaning. What governs existence? This includes religion, God, and atheism. What is the purpose of human life, consciousness, and the quality or absence of death? We have considered this aspect by discussing metaphysics or worldview. 2. Human nature. What are human beings like, basically? We have entered this field with our discussion of the assumptions of social contract theories. Are we altruistic or selfish, tribal or open, more corruptible or correctable, cooperative or competitive, democratic or authoritarian? And what about nature versus nurture? 3. Self and agency. What responsibilities do I owe, and what capabilities and potential do I represent? What can I do to affect change in the quality of my life, my family and friends, and in society? This involves questions of determinism or free will, self-control, moral responsibility, and worldview, personal empowerment, and temperaments of compliance and defiance. A core question is, to what extent can I control my own life, and can I influence others and even history? Paine said, we have it in our power to make the world over again. 4. Status, justice, and fairness. This raises questions: dignity, respect, advantage, victimhood, resentment, and social class. Everyone asks, am I treated fairly or unfairly by society? Few ask, am I admitted advantages denied to others?
My apologies, Dr. Franklin. I must interrupt you here. There is an American citizen who makes the following claims simultaneously. 1. He is the most brilliant and powerful man on earth. 2. He could shoot and kill a man in downtown Manhattan and not lose a vote. And 3. He is the victim of more unjustified abuse and victimization than any person who ever lived.
Thank you, Mr. Henry. Your reputation is that you exaggerate making your arguments, but you make no embellishment there. Those statements are true.
Half of Americans will reject my statement anyway.
Yes, Patrick. We know. We hope to present this information, these challenges to opinions, with patience, or better, with humor and acceptance. You and I are not better people, but we are more skeptical of power, and of answers that satisfy our biases and our anxieties. Remember, Henry, there are examples where ideologies of freedom and justice validated extremism. There was the French Revolution, with the radically liberal Robespierre, beheaded thousands of Frenchmen for questioning his extremism, until he was executed by the same means. Lenin, Trotsky, and Stalin also demonstrate how extremism begot fanaticism of opposition. These are examples of revolutionary absolutism and utopian ideology. The same forces of righteousness, from opposite sides, press extremism. It is a power which can spiral to annihilation of civilizations into totalitarian regimes from either side. Allow me to return to my points. The next one is basic. 5. Knowledge and belief. This is the common sense of epistemology. How do we decide what is true? Why do we believe what we believe? It is usually because what we accept coincides with what we already believe is true. This relates to axioms of faith, then science and evidence, tradition, authority, experience, intuition, ideology, propaganda, definitions and language, and tolerance of ambiguity. That is to say that we human beings may be more confused than we are complicated and complex. We should think about admitting that human experience is too complicated for us. 6. Social belonging and identity. This is the emotional sense of who am I, and where do I belong? This is tribalism that influencers say are the basis of the foundational political problem in America. This one is so important that we have two guests to discuss it next, Charles Darwin and Edward O. Wilson. So we move on to structure, or organization. 7. Political power and social organization. Here we finally move into design or structure of society and government. This brings us back to operational definitions. What are democracy, authority, authoritarianism, despotism, arbitrary authority, liberty, freedom, institutions, corruption, representation, self-government, and consent of the governed? Where do these words gain traction in government and drive policies? Avery, this subject is deeper and more challenging than we realized. We said earlier that the structural flaws and limitations of our Constitution, then the government, and finally our society were equally important, the challenges of human epistemology. But our examination has revealed that in terms of altering human habits and inclinations, the cultural challenges may require more attention to these requirements of Republican citizenship than we realized.
I fear you're right, Doctor. We require a separate episode to cover this subject, it turns out. We have said that what we call, now let's call it human factor factors politics is we're saying is no more important than the structural problems of government and society and our Constitution, but it's a lot more complicated and complex than we realize. It's going to take more time to talk about it than we thought, and we have two important guests. One is Charles Darwin, who wants to talk about human nature, and another fellow, a charming character named Edward Wilson, who invented or created social biology. And like I tried to say a minute ago, human nature kind of just is the boundaries of this vast field of phenomenon and stuff that goes on in the world between people and within societies and cultures. Reviewed your, considering your 7 foundations of human understanding and society that you reviewed here, we could look at it a little in another way too and realize that we're talking about ideologies, I guess, of economics and levels of government authority, principles like that. And then there are cultural dimensions of tradition, religion, secularism and self-expression and freedom in that sense. The third element buried in there is morality. I think you mentioned, but we want to look at that in terms of recent theory that covers care, justice, liberty, loyalty, authority, and sanctity or righteousness. And last, clearly related to structure, are power and the extensive power and the limits and so forth that we're going to talk about later. But that is also part of culture, part of people's beliefs. So we apologize, or not at all, I guess, but we are going to need to develop more about this civic curriculum that Adam's put on us. And so please join us next time when we will offer what we call Human Factors Politics in Section 5. And thank you for your attention.